The movie begins on a football field where we see a coach called Mr. Joe Willis getting very angry at the team's performance. He tells everyone to get off the field and flips over the bench in disgust. As he looks over his shoulder, something mysterious comes over him. In the next scene, the principal is having a meeting with other teachers, which runs later into the evening. Mrs. Drake forgets her keys and heads back inside to get them. Suddenly the coach appears behind with a deranged look in his eyes. He begins talking to her, which makes her feel uncomfortable, and then asks her for a pencil. When she hands it over to him, he stabs her in the hand. Mrs. Drake screams out in horror and slashes him around the face with her keys, makes a run for it. The school is in total darkness, and when she gets to the door, she finds that it has been chained up. She manages to get to the hallway and sees another teacher called Mrs. Olson standing outside. She begs her to open the door, but she is unable to help. Mrs. Drake has no choice but to go back inside to try and find the key. She makes her way in slowly and finds the key, but just then, Mr. Willis appears and they get into a struggle. Lucky for her, Mrs. Olson turns up and helps her lock Mr. Willis in the cupboard. Mrs. Drake breathes a sigh of relief, but just then, Mrs. Olson grabs a pair of scissors and attacks her. The next morning, students arrive to school just as normal. We see a boy called Zeke racing to school in his car and another boy called Casey stepping off the bus. He is a photographer for the school, and as he is walking, he gets hit in the face. Here we also meet a girl called Stokely, a footballer called Stan, and his girlfriend Delilah, who is a cheerleader at the school. While out on the field, Casey discovers a strange creature and gives it to Professor Furlong to inspect. It turns out to be a parasite that appears to exclusively exist in marine life. Delilah unintentionally splashes water on the parasite, and it becomes alive again. Professor Furlong throws it into the fish tank. The parasite begins to swim around and produces many tentacles. When Professor Furlong checks the water, the parasite divides into two. Suddenly the creature shows its teeth and bites him. Everyone is freaked out by this, and he tells them he needs to inform the university. We are then taken to the next scene where Stan is seen taking a shower. He is startled when Mrs. Brummel appears behind him asking for help. Clearly there is something wrong with her and she has lesions all over her body. He tells Casey to go and get help, and when she comes closer to him, he tries to calm her down, but a large part of her skin and hair falls off. Mrs. Brummel is sent to seek medical attention, and Mrs. Olson explains that she is not very well. She has been having treatment lately, which causes confusion and disorientation. Next, we see Delilah and Casey sneak into one of the teacher's office to try and find some hot gossip for the school newspaper. Suddenly they hear someone approaching and quickly go and hide in the storage cupboard. Mr. Willis and Mrs. Olson enter the room and begin talking. Moments later Nurse Harper enters, and that's when she is attacked. Mr. Willis pins her to the couch while Mrs. Olson locks the door. Mr. Willis' eyes go bright white and his skin begins to change color. We then see him spit a parasite into her ear as she tries to scream. The students can't believe what they are seeing and freak out. When Delilah turns around, the corpse of Mrs. Brummel falls onto her, making a noise. When Mr. Willis goes to have a look and opens the door, Casey hits him with a pole and Delilah runs out, pushing Mrs. Olson out of the way. They manage to get out, and outside in the corridor, they see Mrs. Drake and Mr. Tate and frantically try to explain to them what is going on. Surprisingly, they have a smirk on their face and don't take what they are saying seriously. They see the other teachers appear, and that's when they realize that all the teachers have already been infected. They quickly run out of the school, afraid for their lives. The next day, Casey comes back to the school with his parents and 2 police officers. The officer checks the storage cupboard and discovers a doll inside. Mrs. Drake then asks to the officer if she can have a private word. Minutes later he appears from the room looking very strange. Casey realizes that he too has been infected. To try and protect his parents, he tells the teacher that recently he has not been feeling well and gets on his way. The next morning his father drops him to school, and when he looks back, he sees Mr. Willis talking to his father, and they both just stare at him. Next, Casey meets with Delilah and they are both very worried. Back at the teacher's faculty office, all the teachers are seen acting very strangely. They up the aircon and fill the shelves with drinking water. They notice that a lot of the students seem lethargic and very thirsty. Casey goes to the library where he finds Stokely and he tells her what he and Delilah saw in the teacher's room. He tells her that it appears as though the teachers are being controlled by something, but she doesn't seem to believe him. They then meet up with Delilah and Stan in the hallway and make their way to the biology classroom, where they discover that the parasite is missing from the tank. Next door, Zeke and Mary Beth are getting it on when they hear them talking. They make their way over and suddenly Professor Furlong arrives. Zeke tells him what they heard the other group talking about, and a crazed look appears on his face. As Zeke tries to leave, Furlong grabs him. When Casey and Delilah try to walk off, he also grabs them and doesn't let them leave. They all then get into a struggle and a fight breaks out. Zeke grabs a knife and swings it at Furlong and catches him on the hand, and the students are shocked when they see his fingers on the floor still trying to attack them. As Furlong attacks Zeke, he manages to pull out a syringe and shoves it in his eye. The substance reacts and we see him falling onto the floor. Casey quickly traps one of his fingers in a jar and they make their way outside. That's when they realize that many of the students have also been infected. They then all jump into a car and drive off. When they get to Zeke's house, he takes them into his lab where he cooks. They take out the finger and feed it to a rat. The rat quickly becomes infected as the parasite enters through his ear. Zeke then puts some of his powder that he has been cooking on the parasite and surprisingly it dies. Stokely suggests that if they can kill the main leader, perhaps all the infected would return to normal. He suggests that they should all take a little bit of the substance to make sure none of them are already infected. They all take turns and suddenly, Delilah is shown to be infected. Before the others can do anything, she breaks through the lab and gets away. They then all head back to the school to try and find the main leader. When they get there, they believe that Principal Drake is the leader and get her to come to the gym. There they quickly tie her up, and when she tries to fight back, Mary Beth throws the substance all over her, causing her to fall onto the floor and die. Stan then decides to go outside and check if everyone has returned back to normal. To his surprise, he sees Mr. Willis looking like an alien and the whole team waiting for him. He quickly runs back inside and tells the rest of them that he thinks it's Mr. Willis who is the leader. The group asks him to take some of the substance to prove that he has not been infected. That's when they realize that he is, and he spills all the remaining substance on the ground. Zeke thinks that there still may be substance left in his car, so he and Casey go to check. As soon as they are outside, they are chased by the infected football team. Casey distracts them and Zeke makes it to his car. There he is confronted by Miss Burke. Just as she is about to infect him, he jumps in the car, but she manages to get in. He then crashes the car, sending her flying through the windscreen. As he looks on, he sees her head crawling around looking for her body. Back at the gym, Mary Beth is talking with Stokely when she finds her behavior slightly odd. When Stokely turns around, she attacks her, finally revealing to be the Queen alien. Casey gets back to the gym, is horrified to see the Queen with huge tentacles and arms. As they make a run for it, the Queen grabs Stokely and pulls her into the pool. Casey somehow pulls her out and they go and hide. Stokely sees Zeke return with the substance in his hand. Mary Beth comes out naked trying to seduce him, but this doesn't work. As he is just about to finish her off, Stokely grabs his hand and reveals that she also has been infected. Casey comes to his rescue and they manage to lock Stokely behind a door. They make a run for it, but Mary Beth catches Zeke and throws him over the lockers. Casey then picks up the syringes and goes and hides. He hears Mary Beth talking and telling them to become one of them. She then goes mad, turning back into a creature looking for Casey. He manages to get to the sports hall and lures the Queen to underneath the steps. He then presses a button which makes them retract. Casey manages to get out just in time but traps the creature inside. As Casey pokes the syringe into its eye to finish it off, it spits out all these parasites which attacks his face. Luckily for him, as the Queen finally dies, all the parasites fall onto the floor and everyone returns to normal. Sometime later, we see that Zeke has joined the football team with Miss Burke, his biggest fan. Stokely and Stan are still together as a couple and Casey becomes the hero of the school and the movie ends there. You guys are awesome if you have made it this far in the video. If you want to see more of such movie recaps, hit the subscribe button to become part of our movie family.